Have you ever noticed that when we succeed, we call it hard work or, strategy or vision, but then the second we fail, we suddenly find ourselves blaming like a 17th century military firearm.
Right, or a bundle of dried grass.
Exactly. Or, even the geometric alignment of burning gas millions of light years away. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the really bizarre, highly specific, and honestly sometimes violent vocabulary the English language uses to describe, well, the invisible forces of luck.
And it's a completely fascinating linguistic paradox, really. Because we live in this era of hyper-rationality. We track our sleep cycles, we use algorithms to predict the stock market.
Oh yeah, we optimize our diets down to the literal micronutrients.
Exactly. We desperately want to believe we are the architects of our own destiny. Yet when you look at advanced C2-level English idioms, the language we actually rely on to describe our most pivotal moments reveals this deep underlying anxiety, an anxiety that we are actually in control of absolutely nothing.
And that anxiety is exactly what we are unpacking in this deep dive. Because, look, whether you are walking into a career-defining meeting today or trying to navigate a really complex legal negotiation or, even just trying to salvage a strained relationship, you probably feel a sense of agency.
You feel prepared.
Right. You've prepped the data, you've rehearsed the talking points, but the sources we are analyzing today basically strip away that entire illusion of control. We are exploring how humanity uses metaphor to articulate the terrifying reality of chaos, probability, and just blind serendipity.
And what really elevates these sources is their focus on the linguistic mechanics of attribution. Like, how do we linguistically assign blame when things go wrong?
Yeah.
And conversely, how do we allocate credit when things go right?
Yeah, because we aren't just looking at what these idioms mean on a surface level, right?
No, not at all. We are dissecting the psychological need for these phrases. We've drawn on metaphors from agrarian survival tactics, early industrial warfare, and actuarial mathematics to build a vocabulary that lets us cope with an unpredictable universe.
Which is so wild to think about. So let's start at the most uncomfortable end of that spectrum. Before we can talk about the miracles of serendipity, we have to examine how language processes pure, unadulterated misery.
The dark side of luck.
Yeah. Our sources point to one of the most foundational idioms for random misfortune, which is drawing the short straw. Now, on the surface, everyone knows what this means, right? You get stuck with the worst task. But the psychology embedded in this phrase is entirely about forced randomization.
To really understand the weight of this idiom, we have to look at the historical and sociological context of ancient agrarian societies. Long before we had the luxury of delegating unpleasant tasks to, automated systems or whatever, human survival often required someone to undertake a profoundly dangerous or even lethal duty.
Like, what kind of duties are we talking about here?
Oh, things like investigating a predator outside the encampment in the dead of night, or rationing a severely dwindling food supply during a winter storm. The community desperately needed a decision-making mechanism that completely removed human bias.
Because if a leader just points at someone and says, hey, you do it, that breeds so much resentment.
Exactly. It fractures the social cohesion of the group. You can't have a functional tribe if everyone thinks the leader's just playing favorites.
Right, so they turned to the most ubiquitous material they had available, which was dried grass.
Just literal pieces of straw. And the mechanic is brilliant in its simplicity. You have a leader holding several identical tops of straw in a closed fist, right? And one is secretly snapped off at the bottom. It's a very early attempt at engineering a perfectly fair system.
But linguistically, what is so fascinating is how this phrase operates in modern English. We use it to describe situations where a system is theoretically fair, but the outcome is personally devastating to you.
Yes, the key word there being theoretically.
Right, I want to pause on that concept of theoretical fairness, because when someone says, oh, I drew the short straw and have to work the New Year's Eve holiday shift, they are using a passive construction.
They aren't saying, my manager hates me.
Exactly. They are deliberately invoking a metaphor of a blind lottery to protect their own ego. It's a way of saying, I didn't fail, the universe just selected me. But, I struggle with whether that fairness is always genuine, because even in the original historical context, someone still had to physically hold those straws.
That is a critical nuance, and you're touching on the psychology of the locus of control. Drawing the short straw externalizes that locus of control to pure chance. But as you astutely point out, human beings are incredibly suspicious of chance.
We're so paranoid.
Oh, absolutely. We have an innate paranoia that the person holding the straws might just be, subtly angling the shortest one toward the person they consider expendable.
Which transitions us perfectly away from the comforting illusion of a blind lottery and into a much, much darker linguistic coping mechanism. Because it's one thing to accept the cruelty of a short straw. I mean, we can live with a chaotic universe.
And we can accept bad luck.
Yeah, but what drives human beings truly mad is the suspicion that the chaos isn't random at all. This brings us to the idiom of having the deck stacked against you.
Right. Here we move from the agrarian field to the architecture of the modern casino. We are dealing with the standard 52-card poker deck. In C2 level discourse, this phrase is crucial for articulating systemic inequality.
Because a fair deck of cards operates purely on the laws of probability.
Exactly. But stacking a deck, that requires premeditation. It requires a dealer who actively, secretly arranges the sequence of the cards to guarantee a predetermined outcome.
But wait, I have to challenge how this phrase is used in modern corporate or social environments, because it feels like, lately, having the deck stacked against you has become the ultimate loser's limp.
What do you mean?
Well, it feels like a phrase people use when they just want to avoid taking responsibility for their own poor strategy. Like, if a tech startup fails because they didn't do basic market research, the founder might just go on a podcast and say, well, the deck was stacked against us by the big tech monopolies. Isn't this phrase often just a shield for incompetence?
It can absolutely be weaponized as a defense mechanism, yes.
Yeah.
Which is a classic example of the self-serving bias in psychology. I mean, we naturally attribute our successes to our own brilliance.
Oh, of course, I'm a genius when I win.
Right. And we attribute our failures to external, insurmountable forces. However, we do have to distinguish between perceived victimization and actual systemic barriers. The true linguistic power of the deck stacked against you lies in its application to scenarios where the rules of engagement are fundamentally asymmetrical.
Okay, give me a concrete breakdown of that asymmetry. Because if I am sitting at a poker table and the dealer is actively cheating, the math literally prevents me from winning, regardless of my skill level.
Let's apply it to a socioeconomic context detailed in our sources. Consider the concept of historical redlining in real estate.
Yeah.
Or a scenario of a local independent coffee shop trying to compete with a multinational conglomerate.
Oh, that's a great example.
The multinational doesn't just have better cards, they effectively own the table. They can operate at a massive loss for years just to starve out local competition. They have global supply chain monopolies. So when the independent business owner says, the deck is stacked against us, it is not an excuse for poor strategy.
It is an accurate assessment of a rigged environment.
Precisely. And notice the grammatical structure we instinctively rely on. We rarely say, they stacked the deck. We use the passive state. The deck was stacked against me.
Wow, yeah. It emphasizes the complete helplessness of the subject.
It does. The perpetrator, the cheating dealer, essentially is often left entirely unnamed, representing society, the economy, or the establishment at large.
Which naturally raises a really tough philosophical dilemma for you. If you recognize that the deck is mathematically stacked, that the environment is hostile and the rules are completely rigged, the most logical, rational response is to just fold your cards and walk away.
Right. Why play a game you cannot mathematically win?
Exactly. Yet human history is entirely shaped by people who refuse to look at the math. Which brings us to our next linguistic pillar, the concept of fighting back against all odds.
To fully grasp the gravitas of this phrase, we have to delve into actuarial science and the history of bookmaking. We are moving from the concealed cheating of a card sharp to the cold, hard, entirely transparent mathematics of probability.
Because odds are not just abstract concepts.
No, they are quantified risk.
Let's unpack the literal math here, because I feel like the phrase has been somewhat diluted by Hollywood sports movies. When a bookmaker sets the odds at 100 to 1 against a specific outcome, they are making a deeply researched empirical claim.
They are stating that based on all historical data, all performance metrics, and all environmental variables, there is a 99% probability of absolute failure. So the phrase against all odds functions as a prepositional phrase that modifies an action of survival or triumph.
It acknowledges that every single logical and statistical indicator pointed toward your destruction. And this is why I find the psychology of the underdog so compelling. Why does human culture fetishize the 1% chance? Think about the medical example provided in our research.
The spinal injury case.
Right. A patient suffers a catastrophic spinal injury. The neurologists look at the MRI, the hard empirical data, and conclude that the odds of this person walking again are effectively zero. The system, in this case biology, has mathematically stacked the deck.
But the human variable introduces something that mathematics really struggle to quantify, which is resilience, neuroplasticity, and sheer willpower. When that patient endures, say, a half-decade of excruciating physical therapy and eventually walks across a graduation stage, they have achieved something truly against all odds.
But I want to inject a bit of skepticism here, just as a thought exercise. Do we overuse this phrase?
In what sense?
Well, because of survivorship bias, we only ever hear the stories of the people who beat the 100-to-1 odds. We write books about the one startup that survived the rigged market or the one patient who walked again. We don't write books about the 99 people who quietly succumbed to the statistical reality. Does our language romanticize statistical anomalies to the point where it gives people false hope?
That is a profound sociological observation. Yes, language can absolutely foster toxic positivity. By constantly elevating narratives that go against all odds, we subtly imply that failure to overcome a rigged system is a failure of your personal willpower, rather than an inevitability of the math.
Like, oh, you just didn't want it enough.
Exactly, which is incredibly damaging. However, linguistically, when used correctly in a C2 context, the phrase is meant to preserve the sanctity of the anomaly. It is meant to highlight the extreme rarity of the event, not to suggest it's a norm.
It marks the exact moment a person transitions from being a victim of chaos to the master of it. And when you finally shatter those odds, the vocabulary we use completely transforms. You move from the defensive posture of mere survival into an aggressive state of acquisition. You don't just survive, you strike gold.
This idiom requires a deep dive into 19th century resource extraction metaphors, specifically the California gold rush of 1849. To use strike gold effectively in advanced English, you really have to understand the specific ratio of labor to luck that it implies.
Because it's very different from saying, oh, I hit the jackpot, right?
Radically different. Hitting the jackpot implies you put a coin in a slot machine, pulled a lever, and did nothing else. It's pure passive luck.
Right, whereas the etymology of striking gold is rooted in grueling, agonizing physical labor. The prospectors of the 19th century were not passive participants in their destiny at all.
Not even a little. They spent years swinging heavy iron pickaxes into solid quartz, standing waist-deep in freezing rivers, basically sifting through worthless mud day after day. The strike in the idiom is the literal, physical strike of the pickaxe against the rock that finally reveals the vein of precious metal.
The sensory reality of that moment must have been just mind-bending. You have months, maybe years of sensory deprivation, just gray rock, brown mud, blistering heat, and then in a fraction of a millisecond, the iron chips away the stone and you see that unmistakable, hyper-vibrant yellow reflection.
It is an instant violent paradigm shift.
And that ratio of labor to luck is exactly how the phrase operates in modern professional English. Like when a venture capitalist says they struck gold with a new tech startup, they are acknowledging that they had to sift through hundreds of terrible pitches, the mud and the rocks, essentially.
Right. They put in the grueling analytical labor. But finding the one visionary founder who happens to be pitching on the exact day the VC has capital to deploy, that is the luck of the strike.
Let's apply this to a managerial context for you. Let's say you're trying to hire a lead engineer. You interview 50 people. It's exhausting. It's a miserable process of reading resumes that all blur together into gray mud. You are swinging the pickaxe.
The labor.
Exactly. But then candidate 51 sits down, and within 5 minutes, you realize they possess a completely unique, paradigm-shifting perspective on your software architecture. You didn't just make a solid hire, you struck gold. The effort put you in the position, but the luck delivered the payload.
Yet the language of resource extraction contains a built-in warning mechanism, because human perception is notoriously flawed. Sometimes the thing glittering in the mud isn't gold at all.
Well, iron pyrite fools gold.
Exactly. Sometimes the universe hands you an illusion of success that is basically designed to humiliate you. Which brings us to perhaps the most visually spectacular yet inherently tragic idiom in our entire linguistic stack: a flash in the pan.
I am obsessed with the etymology of this phrase because it perfectly encapsulates the modern attention economy, despite being hundreds of years old.
We are transitioning now from the gold mines to the battlefields of the 17th century. To understand the noun phrase, a flash in the pan, We really must analyze the specific mechanical failure of the flintlock musket. Now, most people understand the basic premise of early firearms, but the nuance lies in the sequence of ignition.
Right. Casa musket isn't a closed, modernized bullet like we have today. It's an open chemical reaction that you have to orchestrate by hand in the middle of a battlefield.
Precisely. On the exterior of the musket lock, there's a small, shallow depression called the pan. A soldier would prime the weapon by pouring a tiny pinch of highly volatile, finely ground gunpowder into this pan. And then the main charge and the heavy lead ball were rammed down the main barrel.
So you have two completely separate compartments of explosives.
Yes. When the trigger is pulled, a piece of flint strikes a steel frizzen. This generates a shower of sparks designed to land in the external pan, igniting the priming powder. Now, the critical mechanism is the touch hole, a tiny channel connecting the exterior pan to the interior barrel.
Okay, so the fire from the pan is supposed to travel through that tiny hole and detonate the main charge inside the gun.
Exactly. But given the era of manufacturing, that touch hole was incredibly susceptible to moisture, dirt, or just poor craftsmanship.
I'm assuming it got blocked constantly.
Frequently blocked. And when it was blocked, you experience the phenomenon. The soldier pulls the trigger, the sparks fall perfectly, the powder in the pan detonates with a massive blinding flash of light and a loud crack of smoke right in front of the soldier's face.
It looks exactly like the gun has fired.
It creates the complete visual and auditory illusion of a successful discharge. But because the fire couldn't breach the touch hole, the main charge never ignites. The heavy lead bullet simply sits inert in the barrel. It's a spectacular display of energy that produces zero kinetic output, a flash in the pan.
Wow, that mechanical failure translates so flawlessly to modern psychological and cultural phenomena. The dopamine hit of the flash without the substance of the bullet. Let's talk about the tech industry, or even the entertainment world. I mean, how many viral apps or internet celebrities operate exactly like a 17th century musket?
It is the defining characteristic of the modern attention economy. A product launches, it goes entirely viral for a 3-week cycle. It generates massive media coverage. The founders are elevated to visionary status.
This is the flash in the smoke.
Yes, the flash in the smoke. But they have no underlying business model. They have no customer retention strategy. They have no actual structural utility. The touch hole is blocked. So 3 months later, the company bankrupts. They achieved a sudden, explosive burst of popularity that failed to sustain permanent momentum.
Linguistically, using flash in the pan in a C2 context serves as a critique of sustainability. It is a cynical phrase, really. It warns you not to be blinded by sudden explosive metrics, but to demand evidence of long-term kinetic impact. Which leads us to a really uncomfortable question about human psychology. If you actually manage to strike real gold, and you avoid being a flash in the pan, how do you sustain it? Because our sources suggest that the biggest threat to long-term success isn't external chaos. The biggest threat is our own inability to process good luck rationally. We actively destroy our own serendipity.
We are entering the territory of cognitive dissonance and greed here. We are returning to the architecture of the casino, but this time, the deck is completely fair. We are at the blackjack table, examining the idiom of pushing your luck.
This is where we analyze the absolute hubris of the human ego. Because pushing your luck isn't about taking a calculated risk in a bad situation. It's about taking a wildly unnecessary risk in an already victorious situation.
The mechanics of blackjack are essential here. The goal is to reach a card value of 21 without exceeding it. Let us say you are dealt a hand totaling 19. Statistically, you hold a dominant winning hand. The mathematical probability of drawing a 2 is remarkably low.
So the rational empirical move is to stand to accept the luck you have been dealt, take your money, and secure the victory.
But the ego cannot tolerate the fact that the victory was handed to it by chance. The ego wants to engineer a perfect 21. It wants to prove that it isn't just lucky, but masterful.
That is so true.
That is the psychological crux. The gambler's fallacy takes hold. The player begins to believe that because they have experienced a streak of good fortune, the fundamental laws of probability have been suspended in their favor. They believe they are inherently lucky, viewing luck as a personal attribute rather than a statistical variance.
So they tap the felt, they ask the dealer to hit them, they literally push their chips forward, demanding more from a universe that has already been incredibly generous.
And the dealer reveals a face card. The total exceeds 21. The player busts and loses the original dominant hand.
Let's translate this to a non-casino environment, because this is where the idiom becomes a crucial tool for navigating everyday social dynamics. The anecdote from the research about the traffic stop is the perfect encapsulation of this hubris.
It perfectly illustrates the failure to read the environmental variables. You are pulled over for speeding. The penalty is typically a severe fine and a punitive mark on your insurance. However, due to an unquantifiable variable, perhaps the police officer is at the end of their shift, or they simply feel lenient, they decide to issue a verbal warning.
At this exact moment, you are holding a 19 at the blackjack table. The universe has handed you an unearned victory.
The only rational action is to express gratitude and depart. But the individual who pushes their luck allows their ego to override their relief. They might feel the need to justify their speeding. They argue about the calibration of the radar gun. They complain about the speed limit signage.
They demand to be proven right instead of just accepting that they got lucky. It's maddening to watch. By demanding absolute vindication, they aggravate the officer, who then retracts the warning and writes the maximum fine. You took an already resolved, highly favorable situation and injected unnecessary volatility into it strictly out of greed.
And idiomatic mastery at the C2 level requires understanding this exact distinction. Taking a risk can be noble or necessary. Pushing your luck is inherently pejorative. It implies a foolish disregard for the serendipity you have already secured.
It's basically an insult to the universe. But what happens when someone doesn't push their luck? What happens when someone is patient, observant, and possesses the sheer technical mastery to wait for the exact right millisecond to act? We are moving from the mundane greed of the traffic stop to the absolute pinnacle of fortune. We are talking about catching lightning in a bottle.
This is where our vocabulary shifts from the mechanical to the mythological. To appreciate the scale of this metaphor, we really must examine the physical reality of the atmospheric phenomena it references, as well as its historical origins.
I always assumed this was just a poetic, impossible visual, but there's actual history here, isn't there?
Indeed. The phrase is widely attributed to the era of Benjamin Franklin and the early, highly dangerous experiments with electricity in the mid-18th century. Scientists were utilizing Leyden jars, which are early capacitors made of glass, to attempt to capture and store static electrical charges.
Oh, wow.
Franklin's legendary kite experiment was essentially a theoretical attempt to capture the ambient electrical energy of a storm.
But the idiom takes that scientific endeavor and exaggerates it to an impossible physical absolute. Think about the reality of a lightning strike. It is a discharge of potentially 1 billion joules of energy. It burns at temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. It is chaotic, lethal, and lasts for roughly 30 microseconds.
Exactly. The imagery requires you to conceptualize a human being standing in a raging tempest, anticipating the exact trajectory of this unpredictable lethal energy, reaching out with a fragile glass vessel, and successfully trapping 1 million volts of raw plasma before screwing a cork onto it.
It is the ultimate paradox. You are trying to contain the most volatile, destructive force in nature within the most fragile, static container imaginable. So, when we use this in modern English, we aren't just saying someone had a good idea.
No, not at all. We are describing the successful capture of a fleeting, massively powerful cultural or creative energy that is fundamentally unrepeatable.
The word unrepeatable is the key there. Let's look at the entertainment industry example from our notes. A studio releases the first film in a fantasy franchise. The casting chemistry is just a miracle. The director makes visionary choices on a tight budget. The cultural zeitgeist is perfectly primed for escapism at that exact month of release. The movie grosses $1 billion and redefines cinema.
That film is The Lightning Strike. The studio successfully contained that cultural energy in the bottle of a 2-hour film.
But then the corporate mandate comes down. The executives say, well, we have the bottle, we have the formula, let's just do it again. They double the budget, they enforce stricter oversight, they scientifically try to engineer a sequel that hits all the same demographic quadrants.
And it inevitably feels hollow, soulless, and fails to resonate.
Because they forgot that lightning is a meteorological anomaly, not a manufacturing process. You cannot mathematically schedule a lightning strike. When someone catches lightning in a bottle, the core tragedy is that they will likely spend the rest of their lives trying to reproduce an event that was entirely dependent on a chaotic convergence of external variables.
Which brings us to a profound philosophical realization, and really the final conceptual anchor of our deep dive. When an individual successfully navigates the short straws, survives the stacked decks, strikes gold, and manages to catch that lightning, they're often left with a sense of profound humility.
They look back at the trajectory of their success and realize a terrifying truth. They didn't actually do it, at least not entirely.
They recognize the limits of human agency. They realize that their preparation, their skill, and their effort were necessary, but entirely insufficient on their own. For the impossible to occur, the broader architecture of the universe had to synchronize flawlessly. To articulate this ultimate realization of serendipity, we rely on the grandest astronomical metaphor in our lexicon: the stars aligned.
We have escalated from a piece of dried grass in a fist to the mechanical components of a musket to the atmospheric violence of lightning, and now we are literally zooming out to the macro scale of the cosmos.
The etymology of this phrase is deeply rooted in ancient astrological determinism. For millennia, across Babylonian, Greek, and Ptolemaic traditions, the prevailing worldview was that the universe was a massive, interconnected clockwork mechanism. Human destiny was not dictated by personal agency, but by the physical position of celestial bodies.
The idea that the burning spheres of gas in the sky actively care about what happens to a farmer in Mesopotamia?
Precisely. The concept of aspects in astrology suggested that when planets moved into chaotic, conflicting geometric angles, squares, or oppositions, the friction of the heavens would manifest on Earth as wars, famines, or plagues. The universe was inherently hostile.
But the flip side of that determinism is the miracle of the trine, the harmonious alignment.
Yes. Ancient astronomers believed that on exceptionally rare occasions, the orbits of the planets and constellations would form a perfect, harmonious geometric alignment. The friction of the cosmos would cease, and in that brief window of celestial harmony, serendipity was permitted to flow uninterrupted to the Earth.
Now, obviously, in a modern C2 context, we aren't suggesting that literal gravity or solar radiation is helping you get a promotion. We have largely abandoned astrological determinism, but we cling to the poetry of the phrase. Why?
Because of the psychological phenomenon of apophenia, the human tendency to seek and perceive meaningful patterns in random, disconnected information. When multiple, massive, entirely independent variables suddenly resolve in our favor, our brains refuse to accept it as mere statistical coincidence. It feels too orchestrated.
We need the universe to have a narrative. Let's break down the real estate scenario from our sources to illustrate this orchestration. Buying a house is usually a traumatic exercise in battling variables you cannot control.
It is a highly volatile environment.
But imagine this sequence. After months of searching, you stumble upon an unlisted property in your ideal neighborhood that is perfectly within your budget. That is variable one, highly unlikely. On the exact afternoon you decide to make an offer, the Federal Reserve unexpectedly slashes national interest rates, lowering your potential mortgage by hundreds of dollars a month. Variable two, a macroeconomic shift you have zero control over.
And to complete the sequence, you discover that the seller happens to be relocating to the exact city where you currently rent, and they're willing to take over the remainder of your expensive apartment lease, saving you thousands in cancellation fees.
Boom. The sheer compounding serendipity of that sequence is staggering. You didn't orchestrate the seller's life timeline. You certainly didn't dictate federal macroeconomic policy, and yet these massive, disparate tectonic plates of reality shifted and locked into a perfect geometric configuration that entirely benefited you.
In that moment, the human mind struggles to attribute this success to mere luck. The phrase "the stars aligned" provides the necessary scale. It acknowledges that a miraculous synchronization of external variables occurred, completely independent of your own agency.
It is the ultimate surrender of ego. It's saying, I was standing in the right place, but the universe did the heavy lifting. The sources also provide a fantastic career equivalent. You spend 4 years getting a highly specialized, obscure degree. Just as you graduate feeling terrified about the job market, a major legislative change forces corporations to hire experts in your exact obscure field. At the same time, your former college roommate gets promoted to a hiring manager at the top firm in that sector.
The variables are perfectly synchronized. Your preparation met an environmental shift that you could never have anticipated. The stars aligned to facilitate your entry into the industry.
If we take a step back and look at the vast linguistic territory we have covered in this hour, it is a truly staggering reflection of the human condition. We have charted the absolute extremes of our relationship with chaos.
We have journeyed through the entire spectrum of attribution.
We started down in the literal dirt, examining the agrarian grimness of drawing the short straw and facing the randomized cruelty of the universe. We moved into the casino to confront the paranoia of a rigged system where the deck is stacked against us. We explored the actuarial defiance of surviving against all odds, the agonizing physical labor required to eventually strike gold, and the tragedy of the explosive, empty flash in the pan.
We analyzed the destructive psychology of the human ego when it decides to push its luck, the impossible mythological task of catching lightning in a bottle, and finally, the profound ego-dissolving humility of realizing the stars have aligned.
What is paramount for you to absorb from this deep dive is that these idioms are not merely ornamental. When you are operating at an advanced English level, these phrases are the heavy machinery of emotional articulation. They allow you to define the exact parameters of your agency. They allow you to eloquently express whether you are the victim of a rigged game, the architect of a miraculous survival, or merely the grateful recipient of celestial synchronization.
By mastering the mechanics and the historical weight of these phrases, you acquire the ability to narrate the invisible forces that dictate human existence. You are no longer just reacting to luck, you are defining it.
And as we conclude, I want to pose a conceptual challenge to you, a thought experiment that builds on the fundamental nature of every idiom we have analyzed today. Notice that every single metaphor we use to describe chaos relies on the physical, tangible, and natural world. We use dried grass, we use paper cards, we use heavy iron pickaxes, 17th century gunpowder, glass bottles, and the literal burning stars in the sky. Our vocabulary of luck is entirely tethered to physical reality. But look at the paradigm shift occurring around us right now. The infrastructure of our modern destiny is no longer physical. It is entirely digital. It is invisible.
We are transitioning from a world governed by atmospheric weather and physical mechanics to a world governed by machine learning and algorithmic logic.
Exactly. When a small business fails today, it isn't always because a competitor opened across the street. Often, it's because a search engine algorithm secretly updated its ranking criteria, and overnight, that business's website was banished to the 10th page of search results. When an artist achieves massive overnight success, it isn't because they handed out flyers, it's because a black box recommendation algorithm on a social media platform decided to push their video to 10 million feeds. So, my question for you to ponder is this. How will the English language adapt to this invisible reality?
Will the lexicon of serendipity survive the digital transition?
Will we still talk about drawing the short straw in 50 years when the randomization is being executed by a quantum computer? Will we invent an entirely new, chilling vocabulary to describe what it feels like when an invisible algorithm either blesses our lives with unimaginable wealth or completely silently erases us from the digital economy? What is the C2 level idiom for being mathematically shadow banned by the universe? It is something to think about the next time you experience a massive stroke of serendipity, or the next time you find yourself staring at an unpredictable outcome, realizing that despite all your data, all your preparation, and all your agency, well, the universe is still completely, wonderfully, and terrifyingly out of your control. You know, usually when we talk about a map, there is this expectation of physical precision, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like you open an atlas or you pull up a digital map on your phone and you see these solid black lines of borders or, the blue ribbons of rivers.
Right. The topographic elevations. It's very tangible.
Exactly. And you can point your finger and say, okay, there it is. That's where the cliff drops off. That's where the deep water begins.
It gives us a sense of control, over our environment. You know exactly where safety ends and where the danger genuinely begins.
But then you try to map out the landscape of human psychology, specifically our relationship with luck, with extreme risk, with disaster, and, our own sheer arrogance.
Yeah, that's a whole different territory.
It really is. Yeah. Suddenly, you aren't looking at physical cliffs anymore. You're looking at behavioral drop-offs. And that map isn't made of paper and ink. It's built entirely out of language.
It's entirely constructed from the idioms, the metaphors, and just the incredibly cinematic imagery that we've developed over centuries.
Right.
We use these linguistic tools to try and explain the unexplainable forces of the universe. And, more importantly, I think, to explain our own irrational reactions to those forces.
Which is exactly what we are getting into today. So welcome to this deep dive. We are charting that map today.
It's going to be a fascinating one.
It is. We are going to look at how language tracks the epic battle between human risk and destiny. And I want to speak directly to you, the listener, right now. Our mission today is to embark on a real exploration of the human psyche.
Right, because this isn't just a vocabulary lesson.
No, not at all. We're going to extract the phenomenally vivid imagery ranging all the way from ancient Greek theater and the biblical book of Job right up to, like, 1940s aerospace engineering.
It's a huge span of history.
It really is. And we use these phrases every single day to describe how we try, and so often completely fail, to manipulate fate.
Well, it's compelling because these phrases prove that language is essentially a mirror of human behavior. Whether you're, prepping for a high-stakes meeting or analyzing a historical event or just trying to process a personal close call.
We all have those.
Exactly. Mastering the concepts behind these phrases unlocks a really sophisticated understanding of the psychological boundaries we cross. It's about understanding why we take the risks we take.
Right, how we process survival and how we ultimately deal with the chaos of reality. So let's unpack this by starting our journey at the absolute peak of human arrogance.
The best place to start.
Right. We're starting with the intoxication of luck and the hubris of control. Because when people achieve just a little bit of success, something fundamental shifts in their neurology.
Oh, the dopamine hits.
Exactly. They become intoxicated by it, they stop acting rationally, and they actively decide to challenge the universe itself by taking these astronomical risks.
It's the ultimate danger of success. I mean, when we try to manipulate fate from a place of arrogance, we step into terribly dangerous territory.
We really do.
Sometimes we pull off a miraculous escape, sure. But other times, the universe violently punishes us for that hubris. And the English language has this magnificent, yet deeply tragic metaphor for this exact scenario.
To fly too close to the sun?
That's one.
We use this all the time. Like, oh, he flew too close to the sun. And it originates directly from the ancient Greek myth of Icarus.
Right, the story of Icarus and his father, Daedalus.
Yep. They were imprisoned on an island, specifically the island of Crete, inside a labyrinth. And to escape this absolute imprisonment, his father, who was this master craftsman, built 2 pairs of giant wings.
And he constructed them out of the only materials he had available, which were bird feathers and beeswax.
Beeswax.
Yeah, which is an incredibly precarious, inherently flawed piece of engineering.
Yeah.
You're relying on a substance wax that is highly susceptible to environmental changes.
A terrible building material for aviation.
Exactly. But it's their only option for survival. The key here, though, is the strict parameter the father gave his son. It wasn't just, here's some wings, go fly.
Right. There were instructions.
Very specific ones. He told Icarus, do not fly too low, or the sea spray will weigh down the feathers. And do not fly too high, or the heat of the sun will melt the wax. It was a very specific, narrow corridor of safety.
It was a simple rule for survival. Just stay in the middle lane. But as the story goes, when Icarus actually started flying, the pure, unadulterated sensation of verticality completely overwhelmed him.
It was intoxicating.
It was. He had been trapped in a literal maze on the ground, and suddenly he had the vantage point of a god. He became completely drunk with the power of flight.
So he ignored the rule.
He ignored his father's warning, he ignored the parameters of his own technology, and he flew straight upward toward the sun. And, well, the inevitable happened.
The wax melted.
The wax melted, the feathers scattered, and Icarus plunged to his death in the sea.
So idiomatically, when we say someone flew too close to the sun, we mean they were destroyed by their own excessive ambition, greed or arrogance.
Right, taking wildly unnecessary risks.
Exactly. Because in that specific moment, they felt completely invincible.
And what's really gripping about this isn't just the spectacular failure. I think it's the underlying mechanism of the failure. Like, Icarus wasn't suicidal. He wasn't malicious.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the underlying tragedy of it. It's entirely about the blinding nature of success. The danger in the story isn't the wings themselves. The wings function perfectly well for their intended purpose, which was just a horizontal escape from point A to point B.
We worked fine.
Right. The true danger is the human reaction to sudden power. Once you elevate above your normal station, the temptation to push past the limits of your design to see just how far you can take this new power, it's almost irresistible to the human ego.
Think about how this plays out in modern reality. You see a billionaire who has already built a massive, highly profitable company. They've already won the game.
They have generational wealth.
Right. They are out of the labyrinth. But they decide they want more. They want that godlike feeling of beating the system entirely. So they start, say, illegally manipulating the stock market or engaging in massive insider trading.
They don't need the extra money to survive.
No. They just want the altitude. And inevitably, the regulatory agencies catch them, the company collapses, and they end up in federal prison.
Or look at it on a geopolitical scale. An expanding empire that has successfully secured its borders and created a thriving society.
A classic example.
But leadership becomes intoxicated by the success of their military. So they decide to push into the next territory and the next, stretching their supply lines and their army far too thin.
Driven by an insatiable hunger for expansion.
Yep. In both cases, the billionaire and the empire, they had working wings. They had a functional system. But they actively chose to point those wings directly at the heat source. They forgot the fragility of the wax that held everything together.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more because I want to push back on this for a second. Let's look at this from another angle.
Okay, sure.
Is flying too close to the sun always a fundamentally bad thing? Or is it just the label we retroactively apply to ambition only after it fails?
Oh, that's an interesting point.
Because if you think about it, anyone who achieves anything massive in human history had to push boundaries. They had to test the wax.
Right.
If the billionaire's hyper-aggressive, slightly gray area expansion had worked, or if the empire had successfully conquered that next territory and held it for 1,000 years, we wouldn't say they flew too close to the sun. We'd call them visionaries.
Geniuses, yeah.
We'd put them in history books as heroes.
That's a really crucial distinction, and I totally agree. The phrase is inherently retroactive. We only invoke the myth of Icarus when we see the feathers physically falling from the sky and the person plunging into the sea.
Right, it's after the crash.
Yeah, exactly. When a startup founder is burning through capital but still ascending, we usually praise their ambition. We call them disruptors. But the idiom specifically captures that tipping point where calculated risk curdles into irrational greed.
It's the moment you forget why you built the wings in the first place.
Yes. You forget that your foundation is fragile.
It's the abandonment of the original mission for the sake of ego. You were supposed to just escape the island, but you decided you wanted to touch the sun.
Precisely. And that transition from calculated survival to irrational hubris leads directly to how we make decisions in that heightened state. When people are feeling that invincible, instead of protecting their gains, they decide to double down.
They decide to bet the farm.
They decide to bet the farm.
So we are moving from the mythological skies of ancient Greece to the deeply grounded dirt and sweat reality of an American pioneer and gambling metaphor.
It's a very different vibe.
Very different. And to really grasp the gravity of this idiom, we have to pause and look at what a farm historically represented. It wasn't just a piece of commercial property. It wasn't a real estate asset you could just flip or liquidate.
No, a farm represented absolute survival. It was your home, it was your primary source of food, and crucially, it was the culmination of generations of backbreaking labor. Your grandfather cleared the trees, your father pulled the rocks out of the soil, and you planted the crops.
It was your literal root in the earth. Like, if you lose a modern investment portfolio, it hurts, sure, but you go back to work.
You recover.
Right. If you lose the farm in the 19th century, you lose your past, you lose your shelter, and you lose your family's future. You are destitute.
So this metaphor asks us to visualize a scenario that is almost stomach-churning. Imagine a farmer walking into a saloon, sitting down at a poker table, and physically placing the paper deed to their entire ancestral livelihood on the felt table.
Just putting it all out there.
For one single, completely unpredictable hand of cards. To bet the farm on something means to risk absolutely everything you have. Your money, your reputation, your career, your foundational security on a single venture or decision.
It is the ultimate all-or-nothing gamble.
It really is.
And here's where it gets really interesting to me. I want to look at the psychology of that specific moment at the poker table.
Yeah, let's look at that.
Betting the farm is fundamentally chemically different from pushing a massive stack of plastic casino chips to the center of the table.
Oh, completely.
Because plastic chips represent disposable currency. Even if it's $1 million in chips, it's an abstraction. When you gamble with chips, you are betting surplus.
Right.
But when you bet the farm, you are betting your history and your future. You are taking generations of labor and the literal survival of your children, and you are resting it all on a completely unpredictable present moment.
It is a terrifying suspension of logic.
It's wild.
It really is. It's a complete detachment from reality, fueled by that same Icarus-like intoxication we were just talking about. You see this constantly in the modern corporate and tech world.
Yeah.
Imagine a CEO of a mid-sized, stable tech company They have a new smartphone prototype. The CEO believes in this prototype so deeply, becomes so obsessed with the idea of revolutionizing the industry, that he bets the farm on it.
Goes all in.
He takes the company's entire emergency cash reserves, halts development on all the reliable money-making products, and pours every cent into the manufacturing of this one unproven prototype.
Or a small startup company that has a decent little software product, but the founders get stars in their eyes and decide to pivot to a wildly expensive virtual reality headset.
Right, the VR pivot.
Exactly. They take out massive loans, they mortgage their own houses, betting the farm on this VR launch. If the headset fails to capture the market, the company doesn't just experience a bad quarter.
No, the company ceases to exist.
The employees lose their jobs, the founders go bankrupt.
They are attempting to force destiny's hand. They are taking their foundational security and placing it on red at the roulette table, which, brings us to a really critical pivot in our psychological map.
Okay, where are we heading?
We have established what happens when humans take these astronomical risks, when we defy the sun, when we bet generations of labor on a single card. But what happens when that massive gamble fails and the inevitable disaster actually strikes?
Right, because sometimes when the gamble fails, we don't actually perish. We don't plunge all the way into the sea and drown.
We don't lose the farm and starve.
We survive. But the margin of our survival is vividly, terrifyingly thin. It's not a comfortable victory, it's a microscopic escape.
And the English language captures this specific brand of terror through a phrase that is physically absurd, escaping disaster by the skin of your teeth.
This one is wild. It really is. It's one of the oldest and frankly strangest idioms in the English language, and it originates directly from the biblical book of Job.
Right, and for context, Job was a man who lost absolutely everything. His family, his wealth, his health.
Everything.
He was stripped down to the absolute barest essence of existence, and out of that extreme suffering comes this phrase.
So, to truly appreciate how evocative this is, let's break down the actual anatomy of the phrase. Think about human teeth. Do your teeth have skin on them?
No, obviously not. The thought of it is actually kind of horrifying.
It's gross.
It's completely grotesque to even imagine. Teeth possess only a microscopic, practically invisible layer of enamel. There is zero actual measurable skin on a human tooth. It is a biologically non-existent margin.
Right. So when we use this idiom to describe a situation today, we're saying that you escaped disaster or achieved success by the thinnest, smallest, most impossibly narrow margin imaginable.
You survived by a single millimeter.
You survived by a measurement that practically doesn't even exist in the physical world.
What's fascinating here is how this phrase forces the human brain to visualize the invisible. The physical absurdity of tooth skin, a thing that defies anatomical reality, perfectly captures the logical absurdity of the survival.
It shouldn't have happened.
Exactly. The survival itself shouldn't have happened. Mathematically, logically, physically, you should have failed or been destroyed, yet you weren't. It defies logic in the exact same way that skin on a tooth defies anatomy.
Think about the physical reaction you have when this happens. Let's say you're a university student, okay? You haven't studied at all for a massive make-or-break final exam.
We've all been there.
Right. You walk in, guess on half the multiple choice questions, and you somehow manage to pass the class by the skin of your teeth with a 50.1%.
Oh, wow.
Right. A 50.0% would have meant failing, retaking the entire year, maybe losing a scholarship. You didn't master the material. You didn't conquer the exam. You just barely squeaked by on a microscopic margin.
Or take a far more visceral life or death example. You are driving home late at night in the middle of winter. You hit a patch of black ice.
Oh, terrifying.
You completely lose control of the vehicle. The car spins out, sliding sideways at 60 miles an hour toward a massive oak tree. You pump the brakes, you crank the steering wheel, and the back bumper of your car misses the bark of that tree by 1/4 of an inch.
Jeez.
You missed it by the skin of your teeth.
The adrenaline in that moment is completely overwhelming because both scenarios highlight the absolute razor's edge between being totally okay and being entirely ruined.
Yeah.
The 50.1% means a 0.2% difference would have derailed your academic life. The car on the ice means if your tire tread was just slightly more worn, or if you had reacted a millisecond later, it would have resulted in a catastrophic, potentially fatal collision.
And when you survive a disaster by that kind of microscopic margin, there's no celebration. You don't pump your fist in the air.
You're just shaking.
Yeah, you sit there gripping the steering wheel, your heart is pounding out of your chest, you look back at the tree you just missed, and you realize you didn't just have a close call. You realize how completely out of your hands the outcome was. You successfully dodged a bullet.
Which is our next idiom on this map. We shift the imagery away from anatomical absurdity and dive straight into a terrifying ballistics metaphor.
The imagery here is incredibly stark and chilling. Imagine you are just walking down the street. You are completely unaware of your surroundings, maybe checking your phone, just going about your normal Tuesday.
Just a normal day.
A mile away, a sniper fired a high-speed lead bullet directly at your chest. But at the exact millisecond that bullet arrives at your physical location, you happen to trip over your own shoelace and stumble forward. The bullet flies harmlessly over your head, burying itself in the brick wall behind you.
It's such a visceral image. The crucial distinction here is the severity of what was avoided. You didn't just survive an inconvenience. You didn't dodge a snowball or a water balloon.
Right.
You avoided absolute fatality. And you did it entirely by luck or timing. You didn't see the bullet coming and matrix dodge it.
You didn't outsmart the sniper.
You tripped.
Yeah. So in modern usage, to dodge a bullet means to successfully avoid a disastrous, painful, or ruinous situation. And the core tenet of this idiom is that it wasn't your skill, your intelligence, or your foresight that saved you. It was pure, unadulterated chance.
We use this all the time for major life events, right? Like, it applies heavily to careers and relationships.
All the time.
For instance, imagine you interview for what you think is your absolute dream job. You want it so badly, you make it to the final round, but they call you and say, sorry, we went with an internal candidate.
Heartbreaking.
You are devastated. You think your life is ruined. 2 months later, you open the news and see that exact same company is embroiled in a massive embezzlement scandal. They're declaring bankruptcy, and everyone who worked in that department is under federal investigation.
Wow.
You didn't just miss out on a job. You dodged a bullet.
Or almost signing a 10-year commercial lease on a building for your new business. You are ready to sign the paperwork, but the landlord gets greedy at the last second and raises the price, so you walk away angry.
Right.
A week later, the building's roof completely collapses due to structural failure. You thought you were missing out on a great opportunity because of a stubborn landlord, but in reality, you were being spared absolute financial and physical disaster.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, psychologically speaking. Think about the emotional hangover of both of these idioms, passing the test with a 50.1% by the skin of your teeth, or tripping under a sniper's bullet. In both cases, the dominant feeling isn't pride. Because you didn't actually win. You didn't conquer the test through intellect, and you didn't defeat the sniper through tactical superiority.
The universe just missed you.
Exactly. The lack of control in these scenarios is absolutely terrifying. You are completely at the mercy of the margins. It forces you to realize how fragile your plans really are.
It's a profoundly unsettling realization, and it is exactly why these idioms carry so much weight and stay in our lexicon for centuries.
Yeah.
When you acknowledge that you survived by the skin of your teeth or dodged a bullet, you are confessing your own powerlessness. You are admitting that despite all your meticulous planning, your spreadsheets, your 5-year goals, your survival ultimately came down to a breeze, a stumble, or a fraction of a percent. It humbles you instantly.
Which leads us perfectly into the next territory on our map, the mechanics of the universe.
Yes.
Because the sheer luck of dodging a bullet or surviving by a single millimeter implies that external forces are at play. It implies that the universe is actively involved in our lives. If we aren't in control, something else must be.
Right.
This brings us to how the English language personifies the universe itself, sometimes as a miraculous savior that steps in at the last possible second, but more often as an active, cynical saboteur.
Let's start with the universe as a savior because, well, human beings are naturally inclined to look for hope.
We are.
Sometimes you don't dodge the bullet yourself. You don't trip over your shoelace. Sometimes you are actively falling off the cliff. The disaster is already happening. You have exhausted all your options. And an impossible, unexplainable rescue suddenly arrives from the heavens to catch you midair.
Like magic.
Right. We call this a deus ex machina.
This is a spectacular phrase. It's borrowed directly from Latin, which itself translated it from ancient Greek theater. It translates literally to God from the machine.
The historical context of this phrase is just fantastic because of how incredibly literal it is.
Oh, I love it.
In ancient Greek plays, think of playwrights like Euripides. The writer would often write the hero into a corner. They would build up so much dramatic tension that the hero would be trapped in an impossible situation with absolutely no logical earthly escape.
Right.
The villain has them surrounded. The poison is already in their veins, whatever the scenario.
Yeah.
It was a narrative dead end. The writer had basically trapped themselves.
Oops.
Yeah, oops. So, to end the play and resolve the conflict, the stage crew would use a literal mechanical wooden crane, which they simply called the machine.
I just love picturing this. You have an audience in an ancient amphitheater, deeply invested in this intense, unsolvable drama, and suddenly they hear the creaking of wooden gears.
Exactly. This massive wooden crane would physically lower an actor, dressed as one of the Olympian gods, Apollo, Athena, Zeus, down onto the stage.
The god from the machine.
Yes.
Yeah.
The god would arrive, wave their hand, use divine magic to instantly fix the unsolvable problem, save the hero, resurrect the dead, punish the wicked, and the play would just end.
It's brilliantly literal, but also kind of a massive cheat code for a writer.
Oh, completely.
So today, whether we are talking about literature, movies, or real life, a deus ex machina refers to a miraculous, incredibly lucky, and highly unexpected event or person that suddenly appears completely out of nowhere to solve a problem that seemed fundamentally unsolvable.
You see it in movies all the time. The heroes are surrounded by 1,000 bad guys. They're out of ammo. They close their eyes to accept death. And suddenly a massive flock of giant eagles swoops out of the clouds to carry them away.
Right. Classic fantasy trope.
That's a deus ex machina. But in real life, the examples are just as dramatic, if a little less avian.
Imagine being on a road trip through a completely desolate area, like Death Valley.
Yeah.
Your car engine completely blows out. You have no cell service, you have no water, and it's 110 degrees outside.
It's like a nightmare.
You are facing certain slow doom. You've been sitting there for 6 hours and you're starting to hallucinate. But suddenly, an off-duty diesel mechanic driving a fully equipped tow truck just happens to take a wrong turn and drives over the hill.
Oh, wow.
Right. He has water, he has tools, he has an air-conditioned cab. He saves your life.
Or on a more systemic level, a charity running an orphanage is completely out of funds. The bank is foreclosing on the property tomorrow. The director has literally packed the boxes. And out of nowhere, an envelope arrives in the mail from an anonymous deceased estate containing a cashier's check that covers their operating costs for the next 10 years.
Those are perfect examples of a real-world deus ex machina. But, this raises an important question, psychologically speaking. We love these stories. We make movies about them. But relying on a deus ex machina is a terrible, terrible life strategy.
It's disastrous because it relies entirely on fiction. It relies on the assumption that the universe has a playwright who cares about your character arc.
Right.
It relies on a writer realizing they messed up and deciding to lower a wooden crane to save you from your own bad decisions or bad luck.
You cannot live your life expecting the wooden crane to appear. You can't bet the farm and just assume a god will swoop down and refund your chips if you lose.
No, you definitely can't.
Because if we look at the reality of human experience, the fundamental law of the real universe is much darker, much more cynical, and much more indifferent to our personal narratives. The true mechanical rule of the universe isn't a miraculous rescue. It is inevitable disaster.
Which brings us away from the mythological wooden cranes of ancient Greek theater and right into the sterile, high-stakes testing grounds of the late 1940s.
Yes.
We arrive at Murphy's Law.
The history here is so grounded compared to the flying wax wings of Icarus. Murphy's Law originates with a real person, Captain Edward A. Murphy, who was an aerospace engineer working for the United States Air Force.
He was working on Project MX-981 at Edwards Air Force Base. This wasn't theoretical philosophy. This was brutal physical engineering.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah. They were running highly complex tests on rocket sleds to see how many G-forces a human being could withstand during rapid deceleration. They were strapping people into these sleds and firing them down a track at hundreds of miles an hour.
The stakes were incredibly high. A minor mechanical error meant catastrophic injury or death for the test subject.
Exactly. And during these tests, Captain Murphy noticed a recurring, incredibly frustrating pattern in human behavior and mechanical failure. They were installing these delicate strain gauges to measure the G-forces. There were a number of gauges, and each one could theoretically be wired in two ways the correct way. Or backwards.
Right, a 50-50 shot if you aren't paying attention.
And what Murphy realized, after a technician managed to wire every single one of the gauges backwards, completely ruining a major test, was a profound truth about entropy. He realized that if a specific part could be installed backwards by a human being would inevitably do exactly that.
Just unavoidable human error. From this highly specific aerospace observation, he coined what is now a universally famous philosophical rule: anything that can go wrong will go wrong.
It is the ultimate cynical acceptance that the universe is actively trying to ruin your plans.
Yeah.
It's the acknowledgement of entropy, that systems naturally move from order to disorder, and that human error is the most reliable constant in the universe.
And we apply this to the most universally relatable, mundane examples every single day.
All the time.
Like, if you accidentally knock a piece of toast off your kitchen counter, Murphy's Law dictates that it won't just hit the floor. It will always, without fail, land butter side down on your brand new, incredibly expensive, hard-to-clean rug.
Of course. Or if you are running late for a crucial career-defining flight, you leave your house 10 minutes late. Murphy's Law guarantees that you won't just encounter a little traffic.
No.
You will hit every single red traffic light on the way to the airport. You will get stuck behind a garbage truck going 10 miles an hour. The security line will be exactly twice as long as it normally is.
Yep. Or you buy a beautiful, pristine white outfit for an outdoor summer party. You step outside, feeling great, and within 5 minutes of wearing it, a bird flies over and ruins it.
Naturally.
Or you spend 4 hours on a Sunday washing, waxing, and detailing your car. The forecast said 0% chance of precipitation. 10 minutes after you put the wax away, the sky opens up and pours muddy rain all over your driveway.
That is classic Murphy's Law.
Yeah.
It is the humorous yet deeply fatalistic understanding that chaos is the default state of reality. The universe isn't waiting to lower a god from a machine to save you. The universe is actively waiting to flip your toast butter side down.
It's a mechanism of frustration.
Yes.
So what does this all mean for us? I want to look at the inherent negativity of Murphy's Law for a second. On its face, it sounds depressing. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong.
It does sound grim.
But if we accept that premise, is that actually strangely comforting?
Comforting. How so?
Think about it. If disaster is an inevitable universal law like gravity or thermodynamics, doesn't that relieve us of the heavy, suffocating guilt of our own bad luck?
Oh, I see.
If you believe that you have total control, then every time the toast lands butter side down, it's a personal failure. You dropped it, you failed. But if Murphy's Law is true, if the dress gets ruined or the car gets rained on, it wasn't a personal indictment of your character. It was just the mechanics of the universe doing what they always do.
That is a very stoic way of looking at it, and there is a deep psychological truth to that. It removes the personal sting from the chaos.
Yeah.
When you internalize Murphy's Law, you stop asking, why me? Why is the universe punishing me? And you start saying, of course this happened. It's a system of entropy.
It takes the pressure off.
It acts as a protective psychological armor against the sheer unpredictability of the world. You stop expecting perfection, which means you stop being crushed by minor disasters.
Which brings us to the final territory on our map. We're looking at finding peace in chaos, dealing with rarities, and ultimate surrender. If Murphy's Law guarantees that things will inevitably go wrong, and if we can't rely on a deus ex machina to save us, how do we process the genuinely beautiful, rare moments when things actually go right? And more importantly, how do we finally make peace with the fact that we have no ultimate control over the universe?
Well, to understand how we categorize those rare moments of good luck, the English language uses a beautiful, sweeping astronomical metaphor describing an event as happening once in a blue moon.
The science behind this idiom is just fascinating because it's rooted in literal, predictable orbital mechanics. A standard lunar cycle, the time it takes for the moon to go through all its phases, from new moon back to new moon, takes about 29.5 days to complete.
Right, and because of this roughly 29.5-day cycle, we generally experience a very predictable rhythm. We usually only see one full moon per calendar month. January gets a full moon, February gets a full moon, and so on. It's orderly.
But our calendar months are mostly 30 or 31 days long. They are slightly longer than the lunar cycle. Because of this slight mathematical discrepancy, these extra days accrue over time, and every 2.5 to 3 years, the math aligns in such a way that a single calendar month will feature 2 full moons.
A double feature.
Exactly. The first one happens right at the beginning of the month, and the second one sneaks in at the very end. That second full moon in a single calendar month is called a blue moon.
So it is a literal astronomical rarity. It is an anomaly in our usual system of timekeeping. Idiomatically, when we say something happens once in a blue moon, it means it is an exceptionally uncommon event or opportunity.
Right.
It occurs incredibly rarely, breaking the normal, mundane rhythm of life.
We use this to describe things that are out of the ordinary, but usually positive, or at least notable. Someone might say, my brother lives on the exact opposite side of the planet in Australia. Flights are expensive, we're both busy, so I only get to see him once in a blue moon.
Or someone who adheres to a very strict, highly regimented dietary lifestyle might say, I stick to a strict macronutrient diet 6 days a week, but once in a blue moon, I will completely break it to eat an entire chocolate cake by myself.
Just a complete indulgence.
Yeah, it's an event that defies the normal, predictable cycle.
Yeah.
Now, if we synthesize this concept with Murphy's Law, a really profound life philosophy emerges.
How so?
Well, good luck. The beautiful, perfect alignment of circumstances where everything goes exactly right is mathematically rare. It is an anomaly. It is a blue moon.
Yeah.
Bad luck, friction, and chaos that is the default state of the universe. That is Murphy's Law.
If you can accept this ratio, you change your entire relationship with reality. If you can understand that chaos is the norm and perfect luck is a rare, unexpected gift, you unlock the key to true philosophical peace.
Absolutely.
You stop demanding blue moons every single day, and you stop being deeply outraged when the toast lands butter side down. You expect the chaos, and you celebrate the rarity.
Exactly. And once you reach that state of profound psychological acceptance, you are finally ready to embody the final idiom on our map. Let the chips fall where they may.
This might be my favorite imagery of our entire journey today. We go from the delicate, astronomical beauty of the moon straight into a rugged, intensely physical lumberjack metaphor.
It is a striking visual contrast,
Yeah.
but it captures the essence of action and consequence perfectly.
I agree.
Picture a lumberjack in a forest. He is swinging a heavy, sharpened iron axe with maximum force into a massive, solid tree trunk. When that heavy iron violently collides with the solid wood, the kinetic energy shatters the wood at the point of impact.
Huge force.
Right. Tiny, sharp wooden chips violently explode and fly into the air in every direction.
Here is the core mechanical and philosophical truth of this idiom. A lumberjack has agency, but it is strictly limited. He can control the swing of the axe. He can train his muscles for years to swing harder. He can spend hours sharpening the iron blade. He can carefully aim his strike at the exact right angle on the trunk. But the millisecond that blade hits the wood, his control completely evaporates.
He absolutely cannot control where the wind blows those tiny pieces of flying wood. He cannot control where the chips land.
That is the absolute essence of the phrase. Idiomatically, to let the chips fall where they may means to take a bold, necessary action, to tell a difficult truth, or to make a final, irrevocable decision, and then completely surrender control of the consequences.
You accept whatever chaos, whatever luck, or whatever destiny follows your action without frantically trying to stop it, micromanage it, or control the outcome.
You do the work and you step back. Think about this in a high-stakes professional setting. Imagine a mid-level software engineer. They discover a massive security flaw in the software their company is about to launch.
Oh, wow.
It's a flaw that could ruin the company down the line. But the intimidating, ego-driven CEO has ordered everyone to stay quiet and just launch the product to appease the shareholders.
That's a tough spot.
The engineer knows that speaking up might get them blacklisted or fired on the spot. But they decide their integrity is more important. They walk into the CEO's office, they tell the absolute truth about the faulty software, and they let the chips fall where they may.
They swung the axe.
You swung the axe. Whatever happens next, getting fired, getting promoted, the company collapsing is out of their hands.
Or consider an artist, an author who has spent 10 years agonizing over a manuscript. They have edited it 100 times, paralyzed by perfectionism and the fear of rejection.
The creative struggle.
Yeah. Finally, they reach a point of surrender. They attach the document to an email, they click send to the publisher, and they await their fate, letting the chips fall where they may.
In both instances, the person isn't being passive. They aren't just sitting around waiting for a deus ex machina to save them.
No, not at all.
They are taking highly decisive action. They are swinging the heavy axe, but they are relinquishing the arrogant, Icarus-like illusion that they can control the universe's reaction to their action.
It is the perfect synthesis of agency and acceptance.
Yeah.
You do what you must, and you accept what comes.
I want to offer a final analogy to tie this entire conceptual map together, just to really visualize the journey we've been on. If you look at the extremes of this psychological landscape we've been charting, the lumberjack is the ultimate philosophical opposite of Icarus.
The lumberjack versus Icarus.
I
I see where you're going with that. One is fighting the natural order, the other is working within it. How does that map onto the specific idioms we've discussed?
Well, think about the hubris we started with. Icarus tried to act like a god. He achieved a little bit of verticality, a little bit of success, and it broke his brain.
Right.
He strapped on artificial wings, completely ignored the warnings of his father and the basic physics of beeswax, and tried to conquer the sun itself. He tried to force the universe to bend to his will. He tried to control the fundamentally uncontrollable, and he was violently, tragically destroyed for it.
He couldn't accept his limitations.
Exactly. The lumberjack, on the other hand, understands his exact place in the universe. He doesn't try to control the wind. He doesn't try to dictate the laws of gravity or entropy.
Right.
He doesn't get angry at the wood for splintering. He just does the work. He swings the axe with intense purpose and agency, and then he humbly accepts the laws of nature as the chips scatter around him. Icarus is the exhausting anxiety of total control. The lumberjack is the profound peace of surrender.
That perfectly encapsulates the entire spectrum of these phrases. We have journeyed all the way from the tragic hubris of trying to manipulate fate and betting the farm on a single hand of cards.
Yep.
We've dropped down through the cinematic, terrifying margins of surviving by the skin of our teeth and dodging bullets by pure chance. We've explored the desperate hope for a deus ex machina and the cynical reality of Murphy's Law. And finally, we've arrived at the absolute philosophical piece of celebrating a blue moon and letting the chips fall where they may.
It really is a masterclass on the human condition, hidden right inside the vocabulary we use every single day. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to directly invite you, our listener, to reflect on your own psychological map.
That's a great exercise.
Look at your own history. Have you ever narrowly dodged a bullet in your career or your relationships where you realized later that you had absolutely zero control over your own salvation? Have you ever experienced a true deus ex machina rescue where something completely unexpected saved you at the very last possible millisecond?
It is deeply valuable to examine our own lives and our own decisions through the lens of these phrases. And as we leave you today, I want to offer a final thought for you to mull over something to explore on your own that builds on everything we've discussed.
Lay it on us.
We established at the very beginning that our language is a map of human psychology. We possess this incredibly vivid, deeply ingrained vocabulary to describe this exact cycle, risking it all, surviving disaster, and eventually surrendering to chaos. So if this cycle is so universally mapped out in our words across centuries and cultures, does that mean that tempting fate isn't just an accident or a momentary lapse in judgment? Could taking monumental risks, actively choosing to fly too close to the sun, be a fundamental, unavoidable, and necessary part of the human experience? Are we all, by our very nature, destined to endlessly spin on this wheel of fortune, swinging the axe and hoping for a blue moon?
That is a fascinating, slightly terrifying question. If the map of human arrogance, survival, and luck is written into our very language, maybe we are meant to explore every dangerous cliff it outlines. Thank you for joining us on this incredible exploration. Keep questioning the map, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.